All right, good morning, everyone. Hello, and welcome to another session of 30 Minutes with. This is Downtown Spokane's recurring webinar series where we bring to you local industry experts to talk about some of the more pressing topics of the day. My name is Kevin Campbell, and I'm the Business Relations Coordinator for the Downtown Spokane Partnership and Business Improvement District. And today I have the pleasure of introducing our featured presenter, Kim Davis. Kim is going to be speaking with us about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how you can incorporate all of that into your organization's hiring and overall day-to-day practices. So very excited about that. In a moment, I'll pass things over to Kim. If you have any questions during her presentation, please feel free to just enter them into the chat box and we'll queue them up there. And then we'll also have some time at the end of the presentation for some Q&A in case you'd like to take yourself off of mute and ask some questions then. So I'll also note we do record these sessions and we make them available online at the Downtown Spokane YouTube channel, along with all of the sessions that we've done before. So you will have access to this content and all the other content that we post there in case you'd like to reference and share it. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn things over to Kim. Kim, thanks a lot for being with us here today. I know you've done some sessions with the Downtown Spokane Partnership and those were great. So we're excited to have you here. So if you're ready, go ahead and take it away.
Okay, thank you so much, Kevin. Thank you all for having me today. I am going to share my screen. I did let Kevin know that I will make my slide deck available, so no need to frantically take notes unless that's how you like to do things. And so I'm Kim Davis. Today I am representing my consulting business, K. Davis and Associates. I do want to tell you a little bit about my background. So I'm on vacation from work, but my day job is as Senior Director for Diversity and Inclusion at Eastern Washington University. I also am quarterly faculty and I teach human resources management classes. I have my Bachelor of Business from Eastern in Human Resource Management, and I have a Master of Communication Studies. Now, I just like to give you a little bit about my background so that you kind of know where my perspectives are coming from. I have almost 30 years of experience in human resources, including diversity, equity, and inclusion, equal opportunity, affirmative action, and Americans with Disabilities Act compliance. And so thank you for having me today. Today specifically, we want to talk about some areas to consider in prioritizing diversity, equity, and inclusion in your company or organization. So what I'm trying to do is give you some ideas of areas where you could do some critical assessment to determine how you're doing in relation to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And this is, these are my ideas of important areas. Of course, there are many, many areas that you probably have specific to your industry. But the first thing I always like to talk about is self-work. So I would really hope to remind you that it begins with you. When we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion and your level of knowledge and, what you know about what's happening in our society and things like that, that really is, it's on you as individual people. So what I like to do is always start with ourselves. That is the one person that you actually have some control over. Can't control the way people perceive what you say. You can't control how your messages are received, but you absolutely can work on yourself. So what you would recommend is that if there are areas, identities or things like that, where you're like, oh, I don't really know much about disability identities or the LGBTQ community or race and culture and things like that, that should really be on you to explore. And when I say explore, make sure that you're using actual sources that are credible. One of the things I often see is a lot of social media and people going to YouTube for their information. Now, that said, my presentation is going to be on YouTube, so I'm not saying YouTube's not a good source. I'm just reminding you that when you're doing self-work and you're learning about other cultures or other identities, it's important that you know that the source is credible. You're not just hearing hearsay from somebody who tells you they know what they're talking about. So starting there, if your company or organization has development plans, goal setting for individual employees, it's important that they are working on themselves in relation to being a more inclusive person. The next area I would absolutely look at is training and development. So what are you offering at your company to help train and develop people in the DEI scape. So obviously the difference between training are things you can use right now, whereas development is, these are things that are helping to develop you as a better employee for future opportunities. I would absolutely say that if you put anybody into leadership in your organization, they should be well versed in in how to be an inclusive leader. And training and development is key to that. You probably know Spokane and vicinity is a predominantly white area. So it's important for us to, if we really want those demographic numbers to change and reflect different parts of the country a little bit better, we have to work on making sure that people in your organizations are trained and developed on how to create an inclusive work environment. So training and development opportunities that you offer are key. And I love it when I see employees taking that on themselves, but you as company owners should also be providing and offering that. Organizational culture is something you should always be looking at. There are lots of ways you can look at your culture. It could be, climate surveys. Bigger organizations don't necessarily have the ability to go sit down with a group of people and try to gauge how things are going. So surveying is helpful. I saw a really great idea to do a cultural walkthrough, meaning you are walking through the space of your company and you're looking around. You're looking at the walls, at the billboards and all the different things in your spaces. And you ask yourself, what's the message we're sending here? Are we sending a message of an inclusive work environment, or are we sending a message of exclusivity? Do we see people, that represent diversity in the way that we represent our company, or are we seeing, one kind of person? So it's really important for you to kind of take note of walking through your space to say, what message do I send? So that's important. And as far as your organizational culture goes, we're going to talk about retention in a minute, but organizational culture is actually one of the key elements to having better retention among employees in underrepresented identities. So this is something you should always be looking at. Recruitment. So, what are your recruitment methods? There, you could really do a nice assessment of how you recruit. One of the things, while I very much appreciate internal opportunities, one of the things that we found from a diversity, equity, and inclusion standpoint is that internal opportunities actually hinder diversity because you are utilizing the people you already have inside of your organization, and you're not bringing in the possibility of anybody from the outside. So, while that's an important thing for people to have opportunity to promote from within, they should also be competing with, the best of the best outside of the company in order to enhance diversity. In terms of recruitment, you could be looking at the way that you, the verbiage in your advertising. Is it inclusive? What kinds of messages are you sending in the way you describe the position? Look at your qualifications. Are you putting in qualifications that are absolutely necessary to do the job? Or are there qualifications that that could be kind of flexible? Because what we find is that people in underrepresented identities, often are overlooked because maybe they don't have, the exact, the by the book, the degree, the experience. And so what I'd like you to do is be more open to other things that people bring to the table, including experience in the DEI framework. I really think it's important for you to assess, the people that you're bringing into your company. Do they have a commitment to that? And so one of the things that we do at my organization is every person who applies for a full-time job actually speaks to a prompter that says, this is how I show my commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, or something like that. So there are ways for you to utilize that in the interview process. And something for you to think about is maybe having a question or two in your interview process that specifically address diversity, equity, and inclusion. It sends a message to candidates. So when they're applying for a job with you and they're asked multiple times about their involvement or their commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, they understand from the minute they set foot in your organization that is a priority. Compensation and benefits is one of the areas where there can be discrepancy and disparity. When you look at the statistics based on the binary genders of male and female, women, last time I looked, it was about 79 cents on the dollar that men make. When we start looking at underrepresented races and ethnicities, they are also undercompensated compared to people who are white. LGBTQ community, same thing. So what we find is that while we believe ourselves to be fair when it comes to compensation and benefits, the statistics don't lie. So one of the things for you to consider in your organization is, what are our processes for setting salary? Do we let people negotiate salary? And if so, are we creating disparity by allowing people to negotiate a higher salary? So, it depends on how your structure is, but I would definitely take a quick look at the structure that you have. The other place where you can look is your benefits packages. So are your benefits packages inclusive? Can, people who are, let's say that they're, they're in an LGBTQ status, are they getting the same benefits as somebody who is straight and cisgender? So these are areas for sure for you to do an assessment. Orientation and onboarding is hugely important because basically people make a decision in that first probably 30 to 90 days whether they will stay with the organization. So orientation being the checklist of things you go over on day one, and onboarding are the continuous things that you do to make sure a person is acclimated to your company, that they know, the expectations, that they're trained, and things like that. Retention. So we do a pretty good job of recruiting people with underrepresented identities into our organizations. But when the organization is not comfortable, they typically do not feel comfortable sticking around. Performance management. What we found is that because people are afraid of being accused of discrimination, often they will not be honest in their performance management when it comes to somebody in an underrepresented identity. So I want to remind you that telling people the truth about their work and their productivity and all of that is incredibly important. And, you need to be really thoughtful that when you don't give people honest feedback because you're worried you're going to get sued or whatever you're worried about, you're actually harming the individuals by not giving them that feedback. And then who in your organization is leading the DEI efforts, if anybody? So I've seen it where it's a small company, it's the owner. I've seen it where it's maybe a company that's a little bit mid-size and the HR team is leading DEI. And then companies like my organization where we are large enough that we have a dedicated group that works on DEI. But understand who's leading your DEI efforts. And then if there is nobody, you probably should work on that because that's important. And then DEI planning. So are you actually including DEI into your planning goals? So probably every company has a strategic plan. So make sure that DEI is embedded in that plan and or have a separate plan that's specifically focused on DEI. Either way works. And so just make sure something is happening in the arena of DEI. And then community partnerships. I put these beautiful Eastern students that I found online. But community partnerships are huge. We have a lot of partnerships where we can really help move the needle in terms of underrepresented identities and getting them connected to our businesses. I know at Eastern, we have fantastic internship programs that you can, partner to get students of all types into your organizations to kind of test it out. So that's something I can provide to you later, is information about how to look into internships. So I do want to really quickly talk about diversity, inclusion, and belonging. I'm going to move through this really fast because I want to give time for questions, but I found this great webinar on LinkedIn Learning. So if you have access to LinkedIn Learning, I think her name's Patricia Waiters. I have the reference down at the bottom, but she has something she calls DIBS, diversity, inclusion, and belonging. So sense of belonging is key. It is a human need. When things are bad, do I know someone in my organization cares about me? Do I have friends at work? So if you want to work on your company culture, you want to work on retention, especially employees in underrepresented identities, it's important to give them a sense of belonging. I have a few ways you can offer belonging moments throughout your day. So connect with people. I mean, it's been a little bit harder in an online environment, but you connect with people in person or on Zoom, however you are managing it, but put down your technology. There's nothing worse than, being on a Zoom call, a face-to-face Zoom call, and you can see somebody's checking their email and their phone and things like that. So put the technology down and look people in the eye, even if the eye is the camera. Hear from a variety of people. So did you know that 20 to 30% of people speak 80% of the time? So I want you to think for a minute of how many people we are not hearing from. At the end of the day, we know that helps with innovation and creativity when we hear from multiple perspectives. So be really thoughtful to try to include. Advocate for other people without speaking for them. Listen, ask someone how they are and then actually stay and listen. Stories, get to know someone's experience. Authenticity, allow people to be themselves so they don't have to mask. And I'm not talking about our masks for COVID. I'm talking about masking your true identity to meet the needs of other people. Redefine what makes the best talent. So we have this idea that education and experience are the number one most important thing in any job. And I really like to challenge that and go, well, how does attitudes toward teamwork and collaboration and innovation, do those matter? So really redefine what makes the best talent. Diversify your search committees and interview panels. So bring on different people to give their perspectives on the hires. Understand the value of diversity. Did you know 67% of millennials want to work for a diverse company? So that is a priority of the younger generations. It's a priority of a lot of generations, but the younger generations in particular, they desire and they really appreciate diversity in a company. Reduce your own bias, support employees so they survive and thrive, and signal that to other employees. Listen, again, really listen, actively listen, understand that the active part of learning is listening. I love that. The active part of learning is listening. Keep that note. And then have diversity, equity, and inclusion at every one of your decision points. And then remember, role models are not just management and HR. Role models are each of you. So I don't know what your role is in your company, but every one of us can be a role model. So it's in how you welcome someone, being there when people need you, asking for a difference of opinion and valuing it. Do not ask for status quo. Ask people to think outside the box. Be the brave person and give an opposing viewpoint. Learn how to advocate for and support others, and acknowledge your mistakes and learn from them. And then be vulnerable enough to share your mistakes with others so they can learn from your mistakes. So the last point being, sense of belonging is key. It is a human need. Offer belonging moments throughout your day, every day. So that's the end of my presentation itself. I'm putting my personal information up. This is my email and phone number. I'm also on LinkedIn under Kimberly Davis, she, her. So I would love for you to, to get in touch with me if you want to talk more. And again, I will share my slide deck. So I am my part and now open it up to some questions if anybody has any.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. We appreciate all that. So now it's a good time if anyone does have any questions, go ahead and feel free to either put them in the chat box or take yourself off mute as well if you'd like and ask those. Just to get us started, Kim, if you don't mind, I was kind of curious when you talk about recruitment. Are there any specific channels or tips you might have for employers here in Spokane that they can utilize or look into to make sure they're casting a wide and inclusive net when they are recruiting for their organization?
Yeah, you bet. So again, I'd like you to first start looking at your language and what you're representing about Spokane. One of the things that I run into when I've been doing recruiting is that there's a reputation for us being close to the Idaho border and things like that. And so it's really important for you to start with that message you're sending out. But also there are a ton of sources that and connections in Spokane that are, places where you could be tapping into identity groups that maybe are underrepresented in your company. So I know we use a lot of sources that are higher ed focused, but it's anything from diversity in higher ed to Asian Americans in higher ed, and we utilize sources like that. But we have a lot of really great, things like Ahana is focused on businesses of color. We have I'm trying to think of some of the Hispanic Business Professionals Association. We have a lot of associations right here locally where you can get connected in communities that you might be interested in bringing into your company. Eastern is another great place. I want to keep, promoting Eastern, but the reality is that the diversity of our campus, our students is much higher than the diversity of Spokane region. So we are bringing you promising future employees right at our own institution. I think Spokane's, if I remember right, about 84% white. Our university's in the low 60s. So we have, and I mean, we're not just talking about that. We bring in students with all kinds of LGBTQ identities. We bring in a variety of ages, a variety of, ability or disability. So, one of the things for you to think about is, how can I think outside the box of where I've been advertising normally? Am I normally just, utilizing Indeed or whatever it is you're using, and go, what are some creative ways for me to promote within other communities?
Perfect. Thanks so much for that. So if there are any other questions, feel free to chime in now.
Kim, I'm Kelly Jones. I work for the Spokane Regional Transportation Council. We're doing some sort of like internal DEI workshops to just understand what the definitions really mean to the agency. Do you have any recommendations on, we know that I think it's equity. Some of them are not even defined really well at like the state and federal level. Do you have recommendations on resources that we could look to for a more comprehensive definition and putting it in practice or something like that?
Yeah, I was going to say the state of Washington Human Resources has all kinds of resources that are available to everybody in the state. Also, start utilizing other people's websites. So, for example, we have a diversity, equity, and inclusion site at Eastern. And so we put resources up there all the time. I always tell people, don't reinvent the wheel. Go out and find something that you feel is defines things well for you. But yeah, I'm always doing research everywhere. It could be, like I said, LinkedIn Learning. I go on the web all the time and look for any kind of resources that fit the needs of what I have. But I would say that some of your best places to get resources are other companies. Go see what they're doing. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. And so companies that have a very clear focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion will usually have some sort of definitions and things like that. But yeah, I usually, I borrow from other people. Sometimes I borrow from other people and then I say, I put a note that says that, this definition has been enhanced by me. But yeah, definitely, there's no need to reinvent the wheel because there's a ton of information out there.
Yeah, very true. And just to follow up, I think I've struggled, I won't speak for everybody on my team or that I work with, but I've struggled a little bit to tailor the DEI like definitions and putting it into practice in terms of transportation planning. And so I feel like, because it's a little bit different depending on what business you have and what you're doing and the work that you do. So I think that's where our internal exploration discovery phase, is sort of been a little bit halting. Is just because there are some huge agencies that are doing this really well. And we're not a huge agency with a lot of resources. We don't have a dedicated person to really like spend full time on this. And so we're like, what's a approach that makes sense, that meets the needs and, kind of fulfills all the things in terms of transportation planning.
One of the things that is helpful, I know, for example, I met with somebody from Parks and Rec, and just as a side note, I do a lot of stuff like just for free. So I met with this person for free on the phone, and because they were like, I don't even know where to start. Like, we want to do DEI. I don't know where to start. What's helpful for me was to hear, like, tell me about your industry and specifically what you all do. Then I was like, well, have you thought about, your strategic plan? Have you thought about, how you promote the parks? You know what I mean? And so what is helpful is just to have somebody that you can kind of explain what you do and then have them bounce ideas back and forth with you. And so, and you might even have somebody within your company who is very well versed in DEI that, might be like, oh yeah, I'd love to brainstorm about that. That's why a lot of organizations do committees. So before we had a division for diversity, equity, and inclusion, we had a president's committee on diversity. And I was on the committee, and a group of us constituents from all over campus got together monthly, and we talked about how we could, have that DEI space on campus and how we could support students and how we could support employees. So, sometimes too, just getting multiple minds thinking about it is super helpful.
Thank you. Yeah, those are all things. Well, it sounds like, we've discussed committees with outside stakeholders and other professionals that are doing this well. So sounds like we're sort of on the right track. So that's, thank you.
Yep, you bet.
All right, we're right about at time, but if you'd like, Kim, if you have another minute, I'll leave the door open in case anyone would like to ask one last question, or Kim, if you have any final thoughts you'd like to just leave us with before we break.
We'll see if anybody has a question. I would just say reach out to me. I like I said, I care about diversity, equity, and inclusion on a grand scale. I love where I live, and I live in Cheney, but Cheney is part of, Spokane County. I love where I live, and I love to see the interest and these organizations wanting to do better in this framework. And so reach out to me on LinkedIn. I answer questions all the time. Hey, what do you think of this idea? Or do you have any ideas? I'm happy to be of service and help to you. Again, I do have a consulting business, but also as Eastern, I often, representing Eastern, I can come and do things with you all as well. So, yeah.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Kim. We really appreciate you coming on and sharing all of your information with us. And so we'll go ahead and wrap things up there today. And also, I do appreciate you plugging Eastern a few times, because that's a perfect segue for our next 30 minutes with session, because that's actually going to be with Nate Bryant, who's the director.
Oh, I love Nate. He's my friend.
Yeah, so Nate will be on for our next session. That is 2 Thursdays from now. And so he is the director of the Career Center and Student Affairs. And so he can speak to a lot of those opportunities of how businesses and organizations here in Spokane can engage with the student population there at Eastern for things like internships and a lot of other ways to engage. So if you are curious about any upcoming sessions, you can always go to downtownspokane.org and we feature all of our upcoming sessions then. Otherwise, and if you're not part of our newsletter as well, the weekly newsletter, you can subscribe for it there. So thank you again, Kim. Thank you, Kylie, for your questions. We really appreciate you, and we hope to see you for another session, but have a great rest of the day, everyone.